Awesome. Cool. All right. Here we are. So before we get into the fellowship, I want to just take a brief moment to contextualize the program. It might seem a little confusing because you're going to be, and I'm going to speak in you as if you are part of the program. It'll just be easier. So the Rockefeller Institute of Government is based in Albany, which is where all the placements are as well. So we are a public policy think tank with SUNY, which is the State University of New York. Albany, as you may or hopefully not know, is the state's capital. And the Rockefeller Institute, we conduct research to inform public policy facing New York State and the nation across a broad range of issues for our audience of both public policy scholars and policymakers. All of our research we try to write in a way that anybody can understand, not necessarily policymakers. And the areas that we study include gun violence, healthcare, drug policy, immigrant integration, climate and environmental policy, higher education, economic development, and fiscal analysis. I'm going to have Laura actually chime in here because she is one of our researchers here and talk about what she does here.
Hi, everyone. As Zan noted, I'm the Deputy Director of Research here at Rockefeller Institute. We have a research team in addition to several other teams that we all work closely together on getting out our publications and events. As she noted, we work across all of these different areas. So we have colleagues who work in education space, who work in gun violence policy space, who work across all of those. My area is in environmental policy. My background is in science and technology studies, which is an interdisciplinary discipline that, in my case, considers the intersection of science and policy, and primarily around chemical contaminants and drinking water. So that's my background and what I bring to this program. Zan, do you want me to talk a little bit more about the program itself, or should I pause?
Pause for a second.
Great.
Thanks, Laura. So the Rockefeller Institute, if you are a fellow, will be seen as basically your home base. You'll work full-time in your placements, which I will get to in a moment. But all of our researchers here and everyone here is accessible to you. We're in walking distance of many, even the placements. So we also run a number of other programs. Some other programs that are directly with, we have the Empire State Fellows Program, which brings postgrads from a variety of disciplines into state government. You'll hopefully meet them. Candidates for that program have social science backgrounds. We also run an internship with Albany students. So the New York State Science Policy Fellowship is just one of our many programs. This is a beautiful photo of Albany here. So Albany is really nice because it's centrally located in New York. It's about 2 to 3 hour drive or train ride to cities like New York City, Boston, Montreal. Albany itself has about 100,000 people, and the greater capital region, which has a bunch of cities, is about 1.2 million. So not a small city, but not a big one, but there's a lot going on here. And if you're a fellow, we'll fill you in more on that. So what is the New York State Science Policy Fellowship? So you may or may not know that we are currently in our very first year of this fellowship. It began in August this year, 2024, and we have incredible support from both the Simons Foundation, which provides the cornerstone from able to build this program, and also generous contributions from the Gordon and Betty Moore Foundation, which enabled us to extend the program from the executive branch to both the legislative houses. And as you can see, placements are in 3 of those places. So let me talk about the fellowship. The fellowship is also, there are several science policy fellowships around the country. And ours is basically, it's more prominently based off of the California Council on Science and Technology, which is in its 15th year. So now it's a bicoastal sort of thing. So the fellowship, we have small cohorts, sorry. I had to admit some people. Our cohorts are 6 fellows, and they sit for 2 years in their placements, working full time. Our salaries are $85,000 a year, plus generous benefits. which also means that besides for this current year, there will always be 12 fellows at a time that are happening simultaneously at different parts of their years, and you will be working alongside and you would be a part of those cohorts as well. Our placements are in the executive office of the governor, the assembly, and the Senate. You work out of those placement offices every day, Monday through Friday. We could talk a little bit later about what some of those details are, but that is full-time in person. You're living here in the capital region. And you're navigating these placements with varying focusing on science and technology issues, providing insights into their intersection with policy. And let me that over here. Oops, sorry. Multiple screens here. So just to give you an understanding of what the 2 years will look like, the first year, which would start September, well, really August 2025 and run through August 2026. So you would move, I'll show you in the next slide. But the end of August is essentially when placements truly begin, and September.
Sorry to interrupt. We
Yeah.
can't see the slides.
Oh no.
Yeah.
What happened? Okay, give me 1 second.
I can still see it.
Yeah, I can too.
Oh no.
Anyone else can? Never mind, Zan. I can't see the slides.
All right, Krisha.
That's okay. I don't think
You know what's going on. You'll hear
Yeah.
from her in a second, but she knows this program. Okay, everyone else good? Moving forward. All right. So over the 2 years, you'll have year one. I'm just gonna put myself back as okay, cool. Okay, year one, while you're in your placement here, you'll come to the Institute, which is located right in Albany, once a month for educational components. We'll hear from guest speakers that are both in government and science policy and addressing the intersection of science, technology, and public policy changes. So that is the first year. You'll be in your placement full time, and then once a month you'll come to the Institute and hear from us for these educational components. Year two, you will no longer do those educational components, and instead you will be paired with a mentor who's in a high-level public role to gain insights for future work in the public sector beyond the program, and you'll meet monthly with that person. Also, over the course of that year, outside of working in your placements, you will work on a year-long capstone project. And those presentations of those capstone projects will happen at the end of your second year, which would be August 2027. So let's talk about application to acceptance. So right now, our applications are open until Friday, December 20th at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Please don't make me answer any emails after 5 p.m. on a Friday. And you must apply through the SUNY Research Foundation website. Some of you might have seen this on Handshake or other places, but you need to apply through that. So end of December, but most likely just all of January, our internal selection committee will review those applications. And we will start thinking about the initial interviews, which will be maybe at the end of January. And I'm going to say a lot of maybe for all of this because it might fluctuate with timelines. You never know. But ideally, end of January and early February is where that first round of interviews will happen. They will happen on Zoom, about 30 minutes with our internal selection committee. Candidates that the selection committee would like to move forward in February and March will join in on a second round of interviews, also on Zoom. These will be 3 consecutive interviews in a row, each 30 minutes, and you'll meet with a rep from the executive, Senate, and Assembly. So an hour and a half total. You're sort of move through those, and this will give the placement officers an opportunity to see who could fit where. This might be a more daunting process, and we'll definitely have our current fellows talk about maybe what that experience was like for them. But this is one of the more important because it will basically show if you're the right fit for this, for the placement. End of March, probably just April is when we will notify candidates of our selection. Also in between that period, we'll reach out to references. I'll come back to that later, but references we call, so we don't need a written reference for that. And due to a session that happens in New York State, January through May, June, really, most of the final placements will not occur until June or July. So you will essentially accept the fellowship without knowing your placement, which might be a little scary, but our fellows can also talk to that as well. But you will know before you move to Albany for the fellowship. Let me move to, whoop.
Zan, can I interject for just a
Yeah,
second?
please.
A couple notes on that last part. I think in the second interview or after the second interview, we also solicited back from candidates what their preference and placements were and how they felt the interviews went. And so we tried to, and I know some of the folks on here, this worked out differently for, but we tried to the best of our abilities to triangulate our own kind of interview experience with them, their experience of the interview, and the placement office's experience of the interviews, to make the best fits happen across the board. Obviously, it doesn't mean that we can always make everyone's top choice happen, but we tried our best to do that, and we will be doing that again. And as to the acceptance, I think generally we know which of the houses, or if they're in the executive, a candidate is going to be placed in. We may not have a more specific placement to say you will be working with or under this person's supervision, or you will be working in X agency's office. So that's just, you will have an idea, you just may not have the details, if that helps.
Appreciate that. So looking at here, if you're accepted, you're coming to Albany, you move here. August 1st is when the fellowship officially begins. And the fellows can also speak to this. August is going to be a whirlwind. And I say that not lightly, just because we throw you right into here. You're going to be here for a few days. And then the NCSL Summit, which is the National Conference of State Legislatures. It's an incredible conference. Last year was in Kentucky. This one is in Boston, and it's the first, I think it's August 3rd or August 4th. So essentially, we would be here for a few days, and then we would go to Boston as the cohort, and ideally both cohorts would go for this 4-day conference, and you'll just get thrown into it, and it'll be, it's a pretty incredible experience. And then shortly after that, we'll head down to New York City to meet representatives from the Simons Foundation. After that, so we're looking more at mid-August, we have a week-long orientation here at the Institute where we learn about state government, and you hear from a lot of representatives that some you might actually be your placement officer. But this is sort of where you're just like a really intensive week of trying to get as much information as you can. So you are prepared to walk into your placement and you know at least something about New York State government, because we assume that most of you don't. And then end of August is when the placements actually begin. Can't say a specific date, but the 3rd or the 4th week of August is when those actually start, when you're working in your offices. And then the monthly education meetings will start in September. So application materials, I'm sure all of you have seen this. I'll have Laura chime in here as well, but essentially looking for your resume, CV, your cover letter. This we find important because we will have some people that understand what you're talking about, but some that don't. And I think it's important for you to be able to convey information in your cover letter to us in the same way that you're going to have to do it while you're in your placements, because whoever you're working with doesn't know what you're talking about, ideally with the science or tech focused. So this will be helpful for us if you can help us understand. Your graduate transcript and those references that we had discussed, we're looking for 3, and again, they will be phoned. Laura, I would love for you to chime in here on what you think makes a good candidate.
Sure. I'm going to make one note about cover letters first, because I think everybody comes from their own disciplinary background and kind of cultures around what a cover letter is supposed to look like. And that can be very different, even just broadly from inside academia to outside. And so I would approach the cover letter for us as if you're writing to a broader audience and not to an academic one solely. Definitely speak to your academic credentials, your research. We want to hear about that and why you're so interested in it and all of the great work that you've done. But remember that you're talking to folks who are not within your discipline, even if they have a broad understanding. So I would tailor your cover letter accordingly and your materials more broadly accordingly. The other thing I would say in terms of things that we look for as we're interviewing, for me, one of the key things is translation, the ability to kind of work between and across different areas, disciplinary areas, languages that are used both within your kind of area of research and within policy spaces, right? And so this isn't envisioned as a kind of top-down model of just bringing scientists into government where you will then impart knowledge in a piggy bank-like fashion. It is really envisioned as kind of translational work that is multi-directional. And so we look for folks who in some way, shape, or form, and I think that happened very differently in different cases across candidates this past year, but all brought wonderful aspects of this. Look for those translational skills. And maybe that means like that you've worked with, maybe you're coming from a kind of health or medical research background and you've worked with patients and you're able to kind of translate the meaning of research for patients and for families. Maybe it means that you've worked in the private sector and you've kind of bridged the gap between academia and that private sector. Maybe it means you've been engaged in your student union, right? And so you've had to kind of bridge those gaps in different ways and work across different groups of people in order to find a common goal or advance something. So I think those are the kinds of skills that we look for apart from, you know, like any particular disciplinary expertise or something like that. Zan?
Yeah, thank you, Laura. So just some of the frequently asked questions I've seen in the past. Unfortunately, we are not able to provide any type of visa support. I wish that we could. So essentially, if you are needing a visa support, we're not able to help you, and candidates must confirm with us that they are covered separately for their visa support. So that's something you should think about either prior to applying or while you're applying. We are also unable to provide any moving stipend. This is something we are trying to work on, but at this time we do not have that. And then placement details, if you had any questions about that, this is sort of case by case, but you would need your own laptop. Everything is in person work environments, but hybrid options are available depending on the place. It all depends. And you'll hear that from our fellows as well. General professional attire. I wasn't sure what kind of questions you might have for here. This might be just a further down the line thing, but I would definitely say visas are the biggest question we're getting. We would love international students to apply, but also knowing that this is something we're unable to support. So I would love for we have 3 of our 6 current fellows here, and this is a little background on them, where they're from, what they studied, their placement, and that's what I would love for them to share with you. So Megan, if you could start, chime in, please.
Hey everyone, I'm Megan. I did my doctoral work at the University of Southern California in Los Angeles. My background is in inorganic/materials chemistry. So I was working on like solar materials, and I'm placed in the executive branch. I'm at the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority. And so the work that I do is, originally our team name was Renewable Optimization and Energy Storage Innovation, which has been recently renamed to Power Generation and Storage. So it's, you know, less of a mouthful. So I'll have quite a bit of a different take on, you know, my journey with this fellowship so far compared to the other fellows who are going to talk, who are both in the legislature. But a lot of my work, which is different, I think, from a lot of folks in this fellowship, is I actually do work with a lot of scientists. At NYSERDA, there are quite a few scientists, but I think, you know, it's our job to sort of translate a lot of these things for, you know, there is a policy division in NYSERDA. There is, you know, we do work with the governor's office, you know, I've been involved with the state's working on a techno-economic report for the, goal of meeting zero emissions from energy generation 40. So there definitely are, it's like I said, a little bit different being in the executive versus the legislative branch, but still lots of overlap. And so happy to, answer any questions, but don't want to take up too much time with, too many details of what I do day to day. I did get a laptop though. So I use mine at home when I'm working from home, but there's one at the office too. So that's good.
Thank you, Megan. Is there anything you want to say about the maybe application or interview process? Any advice or tips that you might have for any
Yeah,
candidates?
sure. So yeah, I would say, like Zan said, definitely the second interview can be kind of a marathon. And so I think, having just sort of going into it with an open mind, I think is really important. I think, like Laura said, when you're working on your cover letter, really trying to highlight, I think, the things that you're passionate about that sort of come through in the lens of like this sort of work, right? Whether it's, directly working on science policy or, skills that you think sort of translate to this kind of work. I see somebody asked, about hours. So at least at NYSERDA, the hours are I think generally pretty flexible, like when you're in the office, you'll be working with some, direct report who might have like certain hours they typically are in, so they want to see you in. I think generally across the state, there's like a 50% hybrid. I don't want to speak, for wherever you might end up, but generally it's 50% hybrid, and the days that you're in versus the days you're not in are pretty flexible. But like I said, you'll likely have, a direct report or somebody who's sort of mentoring you at your placement, and so they might have, certain days that they've already been coming in, so they just want you in those days. But I'd say generally pretty flexible. I think the folks in the legislature will have a bit of a different take, and with the legislative session being only certain months of the year, we definitely have during our orientation been given a little bit of a taste of what that will be looking like. But for the executive, it's more sort of pretty like 9 to 5, pretty generally like pretty flexible though. If you want to work 10 to 6, at least where I am, like nobody would be upset at that.
Thank you, Megan. And Quaisha, we'll have you chat next.
Hello, everyone. My name's Anquasia. I'll give some background. So I'm from Rochester, New York. I started out at the University of Rochester studying microbiology, immunology. Then I did a postbac at Brown doing microbiology, immunology, and I got my PhD from Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute, mainly doing structural and cell biology. I looked at, I said, like protein-protein interactions and Alzheimer's disease. I did a lot of protein structure work, and then working with immune cells such as microglia. And I was nervous about the interviews mainly because I didn't have direct science policy experience. However, throughout my PhD, really all my educational career, I also participated a lot in business and entrepreneurship activities. So when I first found the science policy announcement for the fellowship and I was reading the description, I feel like even though I didn't have direct experience with science policy, I definitely had some transferable skills based on my background with business and entrepreneurship. And I feel like during the interview process, specifically the second one, it was very important for me to highlight how I can use the skills I learned, whether in the lab or through my business, to also, be effective in this role as well. And I feel like if you can think about your experiences in that way about how you may be able to translate it to whatever agency, or if in the legislation, whatever you're interested in, that would be helpful. So right now I'm with the New York State Senate Finance Committee, and I'm loving it. It was definitely a change in environment. I was used to working in the lab. I work with cells, and if you work with cells, you know you're on their schedule. So it was a huge change in like my day to day. And sometimes, I'm in the office and a lot of it is doing research, especially with me being new to government and how the legislation works, trying to understand the processes. And right now we are out of session, meaning that the senators are not in the Albany area. That doesn't start till January. So I'm in kind of like what they call like the downtime, where it's a perfect opportunity for me to do a lot of reading, meet with a lot of people, and kind of get prepared for what's to come in January. So I've been enjoying that. Sometimes I'm like, I feel like I need to get up and do something with my hands, have some busy work. But luckily, they do have that flexibility here where sometimes when I'm at work, I'm sitting down at the desk doing a lot of reading. I've still been able to read a lot of scientific articles. They often ask me to read this and create a summary to present it to the rest of the team, which I have been enjoying. And then other times it consists of having a lot of meetings, which I also enjoy. And I know one thing they asked me during one of my first sessions was like, how do you feel about having negotiations with the executive branch? And I was like, if only you met my PI, I could do this. So far it's been a good experience. I am flexible. I would say I'm 80% remote right now. And I've been coming in one day a week, mainly for people to see my face and to make connections with some of my coworkers, being that, come January, I expect us to see a lot of each other. In January, my schedule will change. Typically, it's like 3 or 4 days a week where the senators are here and we're in session. And the rest of the times, it's a lot of meetings that's taking place, but those can also be done virtually. So I would say right now my schedule is pretty consistent. Come January to June, there may be a lot of fluctuations, but most of what I'm doing now is just preparing for that.
Thank you so much. Appreciate
Yes.
it.
Oh, I just see a question.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, with the finance committee, it's mainly yes, using my science expertise to help with funding decisions, but mainly sometimes it's just really translating what's been published to new policy initiatives and validating, I guess, the need, maybe the best way to say it. For example, financially distressed hospitals, there was a lot of information that was published on it, and some of it was in research articles, and some people here have never seen data organized in that way. So a lot of it was just interpreting the data and then explaining my interpretation of that data so the people in like the deputy secretary can make their own decisions based off the information that I was able to find. So mainly, yes, that would be my role, is to kind of take different scientific topics and translate it in a way that provides supporting materials to the decision makers.
Thank you so much. Isabel?
Yeah, hello. I'm Isabel. I did my PhD at UPenn in Philly. I studied different disparities in aging outcomes, cognitive health, and how that relates to people's socioeconomic resources, as well as the neighborhood that they live in and environmental exposures. So that project was kind of a shift. I started my PhD in much more like basic science, also kind of related to Alzheimer's disease, similar to Anquesha's background, but then got interested in studying topics that were more directly related to public health and health equity. So that's how I was kind of able to shift during the PhD, and then this fellowship seemed like a really good kind of continuation in that direction of leaning more into public policy and public health. And I grew up in the upstate New York area, so it was also a good opportunity to just like kind of stay close to home while, doing that, making that career choice. So yeah, in terms of the interview process, I will say that this was not my first choice of placement, so I was really kind of nervous to like accept the position without knowing exactly what, you know, the placement was going to look like. It's worked out really well. I'm really glad I did, you know, kind of take that leap. So I am placed in the Assembly Ways and Means Committee, working with the healthcare team. So similar to Anquisha, I'm doing a lot of like background research right now, mostly focusing on Medicaid, which includes like long-term care, and just kind of gathering as much information as possible so that when the session starts in January, I am able to kind of provide that supporting information and weigh in on, you know, different policy initiatives that come up, different like budget negotiations that happen. And oh, so yeah, I also had some science policy experience through grad school working with a science policy organization, and like, you know, I did like memos and meeting with legislators and stuff like that. So I was able to kind of really like highlight those experiences in my application, as well as just like the nature of the research itself. So I think if you can kind of tie, you know, your like kind of create a kind of story about like how your research interests and your policy interests, or, you know, whatever career interests you have, like maybe they seem really kind of disconnected, but if you have a way to kind of connect them and tell a story about like why you want to go in this direction, I think that is really effective. Also, yeah, I can chime in on the hours question. Yeah, so right now, again, because it's the downtime, it's super flexible. I've been coming into the office also just a couple days a week. You know, I really don't have a lot of meetings right now, so I'm yeah, very flexible, basically left to my own devices. I'm not sure exactly what it's going to look like in January when session starts. I do think that they'll, you know, it will shift for sure, but I don't know exactly how yet.
Thank you as well. I see a question down here about can you choose placement? So as Laura had mentioned before, after that second round of interviews, we will ask what you might be interested in and rank them, and but the ultimate decision is from the placement officers. So what you are offered. Laura, I would love for you to chime in as well on what maybe you think, or what would be where we see fellows after the fellowship is over, what that looks like.
Yeah, I see some other questions, so I'll address those first and then loop back to that, I think. One on citizenship and eligibility, it really just depends on the visa situation. So it's just unfortunate that we can't offer visa support. So it depends on whether or not you need that support, whatever your citizenship status may be. The other question that I see has to do with what things look like when session starts. So I'm also a former graduate Senate fellow. I'm a former Senate Central Staff person and a former Assembly Chief of Staff for a member. So I've been through a few sessions. I will say it is very different in January to May, but even within that, it ebbs and flows quite a bit. January usually starts off a little slower and builds up. It gets busier and busier February and March, especially because that's when the budget is due April 1st. You have a lot of ongoing negotiations. There are a lot of longer days involved at that point. April, there's usually some reprieve. People go on break and then come back towards the end of the month. And then there's a push as you get closer and closer to the end of session in June, where it really ramps up again until things are done. And so, yeah, that can involve some longer days at times. And every staff and office kind of handles it a little bit differently, and every role requires something a little bit different. So I couldn't speak exactly to the specifics, but that's just to give you a general idea. There is incredible flexibility outside of those times, I think, in most offices. It varies exactly how that looks. In regard to after the fellowship, obviously we haven't had a full cohort go through the entire process yet, and so I can't speak to particular outcomes, but what I can say is that the vision is that people will end up in various kinds of places, some of which, we hope are staying within New York state government. That might be within the same office they're placed in. It might be in a different office that, they figure out in their time here, oh, that might actually make more sense for me over the longer run. And it's a process of us helping them figure out how to work their way there. We also expect that some people may go back into academia, into research. That's great. And we expect that some people may go into a third kind of sector, maybe the private sector, for example. And all of those, I think in our minds, are good outcomes. And I think we hope that we have a kind of diversity of outcomes for folks, because ultimately that translation, that multi-directional translation is part of the aim. And so having folks across all of these areas who have come through this experience and who can better understand these multiple kind of positions is really useful.
Thank you, Laura. So that wraps that up for us. Thank you for asking questions in the chat, but if anyone else has any additional questions, if you want to chime in with your video or in the chat for me or Laura, or any of our fellows, now is the time.
I had a question about the second year process. I know folks aren't in it yet, but could you talk just a little bit more about what that looks like, how that match might look like?
Laura, if you want to, sorry.
I could only hear part of that. So I think tell me if I'm getting this wrong, but you asked about like what the process is over the first year?
Sorry, over the second year.
Second year, okay. So the second year, day to day is largely still like the first year, right? You're still going into your office. It's still the same ebb and flow of a legislative cycle or not if you're in an agency. The thing that changes is really the educational component of the fellowship, where you'll be paired with a mentor. So instead of meeting every month and hearing from different speakers and learning something new about state government or intersections of science and policy, you'll be paired with this mentor and working on a capstone project that kind of culminates at the end of that year with a presentation. So that's the main shift. I also think there's opportunities in year 2 for then mentoring in the other direction for year 1 folks. So I think there's a scaffolding effect that we hope will help everybody year to year. So that not everyone, all of our fellows this year had to kind of start from scratch and are doing an amazing job. But hopefully every other cohort will come in having a little bit more of a touchstone for understanding the placements that they're in and how things are going to go.
Thank you.
It's like we have a number of questions. Maybe Laura and I can answer them together if you want to stay unmuted. So we'll start with could fellows speak to cost of living it says with stipend. There is no cost of living stipend, but I don't know if the fellows want to speak to how it's been financially for them to live here in Albany, if like that comparatively to maybe some other places they've lived.
Yeah, I can speak to that. So I was in Los Angeles, getting paid like $35K a year in grad school. So, living upstate New York is definitely a very much more financially comfortable experience, Housing is much cheaper, of course. I think just everything is less expensive than Los Angeles. I mean, it'd be hard, to pick a city that's more expensive, but I think that the 85,000, salary is very generous, and I think is, I mean, I don't want to speak to other folks, but I think is, more than enough to live comfortably in Albany itself, or just, the region as a whole.
Laura, you briefly spoke on the capstone in your last, I don't know if you wanted to add anything else about the capstone for that.
No, I mean, I think each one will be specific to each person and each placement and what their goals are for coming out of the fellowship, right? And so we want to align all of those things to be helpful to you and helpful to the placement office, or where you're trying to go thereafter. And so I think it's so specific, but the idea is really that you bring something forward that presents a new potential program, policy, position that could be moved forward, and that is very well researched, supported by research, thought through in terms of logistics and all of the kind of insight that you're now bringing from your position as a fellow. If that helps just add a little clarity.
You want to speak to this question as well on how the fellowship could help in terms of going back to academia? I think you had briefly talked on that as well. Anything you want to add to that? I don't know if you have the chat open so you can see the questions.
I can see some, yeah. I think we're generally very supportive of whatever path and trajectory that you think works best for you at the end of this. And we're here, I think, along with the placement offices to be supportive and to help you make that transition as best we possibly can. Whether that means being references or something else, we're very happy to do that work.
I can answer. We don't have any ability to offer any support in between a gap period and when the program starts. Like salary would begin August 1st, 2025. So we wouldn't be able to financially support in any way. We haven't come across this yet in terms of changing placement, and we hope that's not the case, that we've paired you with the right person in the right place, but we are here as well as your supervisor to support you. So if something isn't working, especially if you've given it enough time, that's something we can revisit. I
see another question here, Zan, about childcare, and so I really want to address that one. I don't think any of our current fellows have children, but I have I have a young child. And so I'll just say that we're very happy to have folks with kids of any age come into the program and to be supportive of that. There's a lot of colleagues in all of the offices that our fellows are in that do have children. I know it's different depending on which office you're in and how that's managed and time. I have worked some late nights at the legislature. Pickup is challenging as a result if both people are having that kind of schedule. My husband, for example, works in the legislature now, and so we trade off different times. Those kinds of logistics can be tricky depending on the particular placement, but it's also something we could think about as you're, in a round 2 interview, giving feedback about placement and all of those things. Generally, offices are very supportive of folks with families. So I don't and wouldn't want it to be, I don't imagine it to be, and I wouldn't want it to be a hindrance for anybody. And if there are further more specific questions, please follow up with us about that.
Laura, if you could actually answer the last question, and then I'm going to have the fellows answer the 2. So should the applicants envision where they would like to be placed in their cover letter, or speak more specific? Maybe if you want to answer that.
That's a good question. I wouldn't spend too much time, right? Because I think you'll get through the interviews a better sense of each office and of the possibilities there. And I think it's often hard to imagine what those might be. And sometimes the way we imagine it may not be accurate, even if it's understandable that you might think of it that way. So, I think you can talk about like what kind of work you want to do, and maybe that aligns with a certain type of role or a certain type of office, but I would talk about the things you'd be excited to work on, the kind of work you'd be excited to do.
I'm going to put the fellows in the hot seat for a minute. We've got a few minutes left on our call. So maybe if each of you could answer both questions, which is talk about your career goals and how the fellowship experience has shaped what you want to do after. It might be hard to answer at the moment. And then also talk about your work-life balance. Maggie, you want to start?
Yeah, sure. So I think, I my academic journey has been, you know, without any breaks. So I'm 27, you know, I went straight from my PhD. I finished in May and now I'm here. So I think, you know, I knew early on in my PhD that I wanted to do a program like this. But I think, you know, my goal with doing a program like this was also to help me define my career goals a little bit more. So I knew, you know, I wanted to use my expertise to sort of help guide and make these sorts of decisions, you know. I think I'm really enjoying working at the state level. And I think, you know, no matter what you feel about the election that just happened, you know, I think federally there's going to be a lot of things shaking up. And I think, you know, the placement that I'm in will be fairly well insulated in that sense. You know, we'll still be able to work towards these environmental goals that the state has that are, you know, pretty lofty. I think, you know, there's going to be a lot of work to be done in New York to meet the climate goals. And I'm excited to be a part of that. And so I think, you know, like I said, like, I think so far I'm really enjoying the work that I'm doing. And I think, you know, I want to stay in a position similar to this. And so I think that was really the goal for me. And I think, you know, we're still early on in our cohort too. So I think, you know, a year and a half from now, I might feel differently, but for now I feel, you know, really good and really, you know, inspired to keep working towards these goals that New York has, even if, you know, federally the landscape is going to start looking different. And in terms of work-life balance, I feel like, you know, I have in my placement, you know, a lot of flexibility, right? Like I was saying, you know, it's pretty flexible in terms of being able to sort of work on my own schedule, work the hours that, you know, are generally best for me. I think, you know, there's really a culture of when you're not working, you're not going to be bothered, right? Like, you know, I've been offered like a work phone, but, you know, most people don't have one. You know, you don't have to download, you know, any of the softwares, you know, government, you know, largely uses like the Microsoft suite. So like I don't have to download Teams or Outlook on my personal devices, any of those things. You know, when I log off, I'm not working, right? So I think, you know, the work-life balance is really easy to maintain. Yeah, I'll pass it on to Isabel, I guess. I see them next.
Okay, yeah. Career goals, yeah, I think it's a little too early for me to really know exactly what I want to do next. I guess even before applying to this, I was generally thinking about going into kind of the nonprofit think tank sector. So that's still kind of a thought, but I'm also looking forward to like the mentorship next year and kind of like talking to people in like different branches of state government as well, to kind of get a better sense. So yeah, so kind of TBD on that. The work-life balance, yeah, so right now it's again extremely flexible. It's kind of the downtime. A lot of people here in the Ways and Means Committee take a lot of time off during this time of year because they are working extra hours during session. So they kind of balance it that way. I have talked to my supervisor and am personally kind of trying to be a little more consistent throughout the year. So, so working kind of like 30 to 35 hours a week now, and expecting I'll be doing maybe, you know, 40 plus a little, you know, during session, but trying not to do like a ton more than that, you know, avoiding like, you know, super late nights, when possible. But, you know, again, we'll kind of see how that works out. But yeah, currently work-life balance is much better than grad school was.
Yeah, I want to second that. I definitely have more of a work-life balance now, and there's just, at least of now, while being off session, there's been a lot of flexibility in the hours, which have been nice. I think communication has been key, making sure I get my work done and speaking to my supervisor, and we constantly meet and talk about my interest and goals, and just making sure one session does come, I feel prepared. And in terms of my career goals, I knew towards the end of my PhD that I wanted to transition out of academia, but I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do. I was interested in like the private sector or like industry. However, I really didn't want a lot of repetition in my day to day, like running the same protocol, for example, every day, all day. So I like the fact here that I look into different topics and constantly have different conversations that's focused on advancing New York State policy and focusing on different topics. I definitely wanted to do something at a larger scale. I have nonprofit experience and working with student organizations, and I enjoyed that. So doing it at a scale like a state level has been very nice. I could see myself continuing with policy. I would love to do something for the National Institute on Aging, for example, like a health science policy person, but I'm not quite sure. I agree. I think it's going to change next year. We'll see how session goes. If I have like a lot more gray hairs, I don't know. But so far, I'm definitely enjoying it.
Then I saw a couple more questions
I
to
would
come
get to
in.
them, but
So
yeah.
maybe we'll just pop through those.
Yeah, just, oh, did you want to do Laura?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
So I saw one about compensation. The 85,000 is per year. And I believe there may even be a slight adjustment year over year, but I'm not exactly sure. And then I saw another one about emphasizing, should you emphasize your specific area of policy, interest in application or interview, or might you risk pigeonholing yourself? Okay, so I think it's worth putting out there your policy interest areas, but I would stay open to across the various areas you might be interested in, and you might find something that you also didn't even know existed or hadn't thought about before, hadn't considered working in. So I would certainly put those in there. We always love hearing about that, but try to stay open in the process. I think there was one or two.
Yeah, it was just basically asking about the deadline. So I don't have a deadline at the moment, as we have to sort of speak in these, but we will know by the new year what that deadline will be. For the sake of time, thank you all so much. Yes, this recording will be, we can put it on our website. I also added in my email there if you have any additional follow-up questions, but I appreciate you all being here, asking great questions, all of our fellows for being here. Megan put their email in the chat as well. And Laura, we got some emails in there. So if you have follow-up questions, we're here and we're looking forward to seeing your application. So thank you all so much and enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks, everyone.